Hi, my name is Charlene.
I'm Zach.
And I'm Liam.
Today I'm going to ask questions about the ethnicization of elite level of football federation in various factors, which involves economic, political, and society cultural. Recently, Football Federation Australia have made the ethnicization policies, which is clubs unprotected the ethnic cultural heritage of players. How have they attempted to be at the ethnicization in the past?
In 1991, the Australian Soccer Federation introduced a new policy that aimed at phasing out ethnic-based names from the National Soccer League, which at the time was Australia's top football league. An example of this was the Greek club based in West Adelaide. The West Adelaide Hyenas had their name changed to the West Adelaide Sharks. This was an explicit attempt made by the Australian Soccer Federation to increase the appeal of the game to mainstream Australians rather than just ethnic groups that identified with their clubs. This seems like a strange way to go about things, as Australia is a very culturally diverse country and a lot of Australia's national representatives come from ethnic backgrounds.
What are the latest policy that have been put into place by Football Federation Australia?
Well, the FFA earlier this year introduced the National Club Identity Policy on June 26th, and on the same day that the FFA Cup Round of 32 draw happened. This means that all club emblems, kit, name, and other things associated with the club cannot have any connection with the ethnical, political, racial, or religious background of that club, and this will not be punished retrospectively, which means that clubs that already have a connotation with these factors before the policy was introduced will be allowed to keep their name as they are at the moment. In this section of the policy that's now on screen, we've highlighted two key sections, 1.2 and 1.6. 1.2 talks about how the FFA acknowledges the fact that Australia is a multicultural nation and the valued contributions that the multicultural nature of Australia has had on the historic development of football in Australia. However, the FFA has outlines that they have a responsibility to protect and grow the reputation of the sport of football in Australia and to ensure its openness and accessibility to all Australians.
Now, while that's good enough that they're trying to do that, I think that without ethnic football in this country, football would be a lot further back than it is today. And I think that they mentioned that they're trying to ensure the openness and accessibility to all Australians. I think that this actually limits the accessibility. If you take away ethnic backgrounds from clubs, I think that people won't be able to identify as easily with their communities, and that these people feel isolated and feel like they're having their human rights taken away. I think that there's plenty of clubs out there that don't have any ethnic background for regular Australians to go and play with. So I don't really think that they've got it right here. And at no point does it talk about how the national identity policy is actually going to achieve this, or what the actual reason is for this. Because there's been no proof in the past that people are finding it hard to participate in football. It's one of the most participated sports in this country.
1.6 of the policy kind of contradicts itself in saying that despite the fact that there can be no ethnic or national background associations with the club, you're allowed to make reference to Australia and the use of the Australian national flag. And
a good example of this is the Melbourne Knights Football Club, who was set to participate in the inaugural year of the Football Federation Australia Cup. They're a Croatian-based club, and they were set to have new sponsors on board, which were going to have Croatian symbols across the sponsor on their shirt. Football Federation Australia forced them to remove this, and there's been a lot of backlash from this. The club has decided to take Football Federation Australia to the Human Rights Commission because basically they're saying that the new laws from Football Federation Australia has actually harmed them and stopped them from being able to make money and be able to back themselves financially in order to prepare fully for a tournament such as the FFA Cup. So the effect that this is having on clubs is not a small one. It can affect them both in terms of membership, as in these communities, ethnic people like to associate themselves with ethnic-based clubs, which often have ties to football clubs. So it's also affecting them financially in the ways that I just mentioned. So, yeah, it's a big deal. In an online interview with Melbourne Knights Vice President Parbe Youssef, he was visibly irritated by the national identity policy. He believes that the policy is asking himself and the entire Melbourne Croatian community to prove their loyalty to Australia. He feels that asking them to remove their Croatian background will remove all culture from the club. Parbe believes that doing this would force the club to be something that they are not. The Melbourne Knights are a good example of how the football community is feeling about these changes. The feedback has not been positive towards the Football Federation Australia, and it is clear that clubs such as the Melbourne Knights will not be backing down.
Why have they put these policies in place?
Well, they've done this to try and stem the crowd violence that has occurred in the sport of football. There was a recent example of just last year in December between Western Sydney Wanderers and Melbourne Victory fans, where street fights broke out and there were fights in the ground. It resulted in projectiles being thrown, flares being thrown on the field and into the crowd. And I think this is one of the key reasons that they're trying to prevent this sort of thing from happening and why they're trying to de-ethnicize football in Australia.
And as well as the elite level in the A-League, there's also been, even in Canberra, examples of this. In the 2011 first grade Premier League Grand Final in Canberra, it was Canberra Olympic, which is a Greek-based football team in Canberra, and Canberra FC, which is a club linked heavily with the Croatian club. They were playing each other in a grand final, and the two fans collided with each other. They were both drunk. They both decided to start fighting each other. They released flares, and it was all basically backed by an ethnic-fueled motive. So the two ethnic groups going at each other, and both clubs received fines. Canberra FC were fined $8,500, which was later reduced upon appeal to $2,000, and Canberra Olympic FC were fined in the ballpark of $1,000. So basically, they're putting these policies into place to try and stamp out violence at the elite level, but also these policies apply to every Football Federation Australia competition, so the grassroots teams as well. This is vision from a Western Sydney Wanderers game last season, where the crowd started to become rowdy and let off flares during the game. Police struggled to maintain the crowd and retain some sort of order amongst the masses.
Policy being properly enforced?
Well, questions have to be raised with the release of Brisbane Roar's new all-orange kit and their new symbol on August 18th. As you can see here, the symbol is very similar to the current Dutch one. Just the line is flipped the other way, and the kit is all orange, which is also very, very similar to the Dutch current strip.
Now, some people have been making the argument that this is just a coincidence. There's no link to the Dutch national team. However, if you look at the history of the Brisbane Roar, the original founders were Dutch immigrants that settled in the Brisbane area. The club was initially called Hollandia Inala. It was founded in 1957. The club then adopted the name Brisbane Lions in the 1970s when it began to compete in the National Soccer League. So it's quite clear that the roots of this football club are Dutch. So as Liam said, it does raise a question. How is this team getting away with this when teams like the Melbourne Knights couldn't have their Croatian sponsor on their shirt?
Is this policy appropriate in this day and age? And is it working?
I don't really think it is appropriate because we have large links to ethnic backgrounds in the national team, as has already been discussed. And if you alienate the fans from being connected with their team based on ethnicity, it takes away more of the crowd involvement because they just feel disconnected from the teams. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think it's going to stop the violence because people are still going to get drunk and rowdy. Most of the violence would have very little connection to ethnic background.
A good example of this is recently in Canberra we had an FFA Cup match between Tuggeranong United and Melbourne Victory. There's no ethnic ties to either of those clubs, and yet we saw flares being thrown onto the field. We saw some physical violence by some Melbourne Victory fans, and it had no link to ethnic background. So people are always going to defend their club, whether it's an ethnically based thing or not. So I don't think that these policies are actually going to stop the violence in football. I think there's other ways to go around it. And I think that the way football is in this country is that ethnicity should be something that should be celebrated. We have a lot of ethnic clubs that contribute to the community as well. It's the way that FFA are portraying ethnicity in football is entirely negative, and I think while there are negative aspects, it's not entirely a negative thing. So I think that in this day and age, in a multicultural society, I think these rules need to be re-examined, and I think really there's no harm in clubs identifying with a nationality as long as they're not taking it too far and resorting to violence or ethnic wars sort of thing.
And if you're going to go through with it completely, you've got to punish things retrospectively. You can't just punish teams that are changing their stuff now, because if teams don't change their stuff, like their emblems and their names,
still going to be there,
and it's still going to be there. So it just seems like a half-assed approach to the whole issue.